The Epilepsy Foundation acknowledges the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this property stands. We respectfully recognise elders both past and present.
Hi, my name's Honor. I'm the research lead here at the Epilepsy Foundation, and I also have a background in neuropsychology, so I'm a clinical neuropsychology registrar. And today, for the Living with Epilepsy series, I'm going to be talking a bit about memory. So memory in epilepsy and different memory strategies and things that we can do to help and support our memory. So first of all, though, what is a neuropsychologist? What do we do? So a neuropsychologist is someone who is trained to understand a bit about the ways in which our cognition or our thinking, our attention and our memory, how that interacts with our emotion and our behaviour. And then how is that affected in different brain disorders. So obviously today I'm going to be talking a bit about epilepsy, but a neuropsychologist might also have a lot of training in working with people with dementia or stroke or developmental conditions such as ADHD or autism. So usually a neuropsychologist will conduct an assessment of your cognition, so your concentration and attention and memory, and then they might put together a program for behavioural management or for cognitive rehabilitation, or they might do a bit of psychological treatment based on their understanding of the broader picture of the person. So we'll talk a little bit later about when a neuropsychologist might come into the picture and when you might need one, but that's, I guess, a bit of background by way of the training of a neuropsychologist and what we do. So today, in terms of memory, so obviously memory is can be quite a common topic raised when I'm talking to people with epilepsy. So in this series of Living with Epilepsy, we are trying to look at the bigger picture. So epilepsy involves the experience of seizures, but it's often much more than that. And difficulties with memory and difficulties with attention or concentration is something that people often experience on a daily basis. So this is something that can be quite sort of frustrating or difficult to manage from time to time. Now, obviously today I'm going to just be talking very broadly about what is memory and how does memory work. Everyone with epilepsy will obviously have a different experience of how their memory functions, and some people might not have any difficulties with memory and some people might find it very challenging. So this is just a sort of general talk, and in terms of your individual experiences, that's something that you would talk to a clinician about. So first of all then, what is memory? What am I actually talking about when I'm talking about memory? So memory is our recall of our ability to learn and kind of hold on to and then recall facts or events from our life. So when people talk about memory, there's lots of different ways that we can kind of parcel it up. So you'll often hear people talk about short-term versus long-term memory. So short-term memory is also sometimes referred to as working memory. And what that is more of a, temporary sort of buffer space for holding information for a short period of time where you can kind of manipulate it or work with it. So for example, if I asked you to do some arithmetic or some math sums, you have to hold that information in mind, kind of manipulate it and process it before putting it away and then sort of storing it into your long-term memory, which is often what we think about in terms of our life events and facts that we've learnt. They're stored away in our long-term memory. Otherwise, we can think of memory in terms of 3 different categories, so procedural memory, semantic memory, and autobiographical memory. So procedural memory is really that kind of learnt motor memory, so muscle memory. So learning to ride a bike, learning to play a guitar or the piano. It's memory that becomes unconscious and something that we don't really need to think about, which our body just knows what to do. Semantic memory is more of our memory for facts. It often doesn't have very much context to it, so it's just knowledge. So for example, if I asked you to remember the first time that you learnt Canberra was the capital of Australia, you probably can't remember, where you were or who you were talking to when you learnt that fact. It's just a fact that's tucked away in your memory now. Whereas autobiographical memory is more memory for our personal life events. So that is very rich in context. That will have a lot of emotion. That will have a lot of detail. It might have sensory memory, so memories of smells or what you were seeing, what you were doing at the time. And we really usually only need to do that once. So you only need to get married once. You only need to have your first day of school once or your university graduation once. And you remember that. And it has a lot of context. So today we'll mostly be talking about semantic memory in terms of learning new information and how the memory works and where it might fall down in that process. So in terms of learning, so how do we learn? How do memories go in? And in terms of this process, again, I like to think of things in threes, I guess. There's sort of 3 stages. So the first stage is encoding or processing, so processing the information in order to tuck away. The second stage is storage, so holding on to that information. And the third stage is retrieval, so being able to pull it back out again. So I guess one way to think about it is if you think about your memory as a library. So encoding is the librarian getting a new book, tagging it, putting a barcode on it, typing the title into the system before putting it away on the shelf. The storage of your memories are the shelves. So the structure of the shelves, the integrity of the shelves, keep holding all the books together or holding all the books in place. And then retrieval is the librarian going back into the library and finding the right book at the right time. So what memory are you trying to pull up? What do you need to know now? And so these different stages can all be affected by different conditions or by different feelings and different things. So encoding, so stage 1, encoding. So this process is very much dependent on our attention. And this is often something that we see. So neuropsychologists will often see people who come in feeling like their memory is terrible, usually meaning that they feel like the storage is terrible and their shelves maybe aren't very structurally sound. But what's actually happening is that their attention is a bit off. So our attention and our concentration, our ability to process the information in the first place, is very important. If you're not processing it, if you're not paying attention to it in the first place, it's not going to go in. So then when you go to pull it back out again, there was nothing there. So our attention is very important for this first encoding stage. And there are a lot of different things that can affect attention. So one thing that I know Terry O'Brien was talking about in his webinar, the experience of mood symptoms with epilepsy. So perhaps in response to a first diagnosis or perhaps coming along comorbid with or coming alongside the condition of epilepsy as well. And we know that the experience of anxiety and depression can really affect our attention. It's quite common when someone's feeling quite flat or quite anxious to have what we call sort of rumination. So there's thoughts kind of circling in the back of the mind. So if you're sort of focusing on your inner dialogue, it can be very hard to then focus on what's happening outside and process new information coming in. So that's one thing that can affect encoding. There can be other sort of conditions such as chronic pain, ADHD. This obviously affects our attention, and other sort of conditions that impact how well we can focus and concentrate on something. So that's sort of what might impact that first process. So in terms of what you can do about that then, obviously trying to manage some of those symptoms. So if you're experiencing chronic pain or anxiety or depression, or you have a comorbid condition such as ADHD, then managing that, talking to your neurologist or your neuropsychologist about potential treatment, or people like to engage in kind of mindfulness exercises or stress management, stress relief. That kind of stuff can be really beneficial. And often people find that when they can focus better, they remember information better. So that's sort of stage 1, and those are some of the things that you can do to help with that process. So then in terms of the storage, so in terms of stage 2 and keeping that information there are some factors that we know can impact I guess, again, back to the library metaphor, kind of the structure of the shelves or the integrity of the shelves. And this often depends on where the epilepsy is coming from and what might be the cause of the epilepsy. So we know that the structures of the brain that are important for our memory are in the limbic system. So this is a system kind of deep within the brain, but structures in the limbic system that are particularly important for memory are the hippocampi. So the hippocampus or the hippocampi, there's one on either side, are found in the temporal lobes. So conditions that we know can affect the hippocampus might be, more broadly speaking, obviously processes like dementia or particularly focal strokes, but also things like temporal lobe epilepsy. So if someone has a lesion or something part of the tissue that's formed a little bit differently in the temporal lobe, it might affect kind of how well you can recall information. Now again, everyone's experience will be different, and in some cases that might be that some people with temporal lobe epilepsy have more difficulty remembering verbal information if it's on the left side, or visual information if it's on the right side. So usually, as a very general structure, the right kind of supports more visual memory and the left more verbal memory. But again, everyone will have, some people will sort of experience quite notable memory difficulties, and some people will find that it's not too bad. So in terms of those sort of factors, there's probably, it'll be about managing the frequency or the severity of your seizures with medication, because if you've got seizures coming from that area, it's important to try and make sure that we're reducing the frequency of the seizures disrupting the hippocampus. But otherwise, factors that impact storage, there's not much that we can sort of do in terms of strategies or managing those other than just sort of improving your general well-being. So that's encoding and then tucking away into storage. And then in terms of retrieval, so pulling the information out and pulling the right information out. So what are different things that can affect that? So again, often retrieval is sort of more impacted broadly by our attention or concentration, but it can also be impacted by how well we're able to sort of plan and organise ourselves and organise our thoughts. So often what happens with retrieval is that if we're a bit stressed or overwhelmed, then we might sort of look in the wrong spot or try to pull up the wrong kind of memory, not organising our thoughts very well. So what can really help on that front is cueing and prompting. So often when someone has difficulty with retrieval, the memories are tucked away, they're in place, they're there, but it's just about getting a little bit of a prompt or a bit of extra help to try and kind of jog your memory, really. That's what will help pull them out. So those are the sort of 3 different processes in terms of how memories work and how they get tucked away. So as you can probably tell from what we've been talking about, it's really the encoding and the retrieval stages that we can sort of support best with memory strategies and different things. So what are some kind of general memory strategies? So I know, I think also in one of the other webinars, we had a really good chat from Ben, a person living with epilepsy, about the many different things that he does to support his memory. And a lot of them we sort of might be repeating a little bit today because I think he had some really great strategies in place. But I guess as a broad general rule, memory loves routine and it loves structure. So the more you can sort of support your memory or support your attention to kind of just take a little bit of extra to take a bit of cognitive load off, if you like. If you're doing things differently every day and have to process what you're doing and have to think about it, hold that information in mind, figure out what's happening differently every day, then that's going to be sort of extra weight or extra balls in the air that you have to juggle. Whereas if you can have a nice sort of very routine sort of structure to your day or to your week, then that will really help things become habit and just sort of take that, kind of ease that load on your memory. So for example, some people like to take their medication every day with a meal, so making sure it's at a very set specific time and it becomes part of habit. Or it might be about having your medication on your bedside table next to your alarm, so it goes off in the morning, it's there with a glass of water. Some people might also like to keep a dosette box, so you've got the week sort of separated up, and again that's a bit of structure or a bit of a sort of prompt or an aid to help on the memory front. So keeping good diaries, having lots of reminders on your phone and kind of utilising some of those. There's lots and lots of different apps that you can use. Some will help kind of remind you whether or not you can sort of tick off a little box to make sure you've turned off the kettle or turned off the iron, just as an extra little support and an extra prompt for the memory. Other things that you can do, so something that can really help, and this is for everyone, so not just talking about people with epilepsy. I think this is for all of us these days. One thing that really helps with memory is trying to process the information a little bit more deeply, so in different ways. And this, again, is very much about that first encoding stage and about focusing on something, because I think especially these days there's always a lot going on. There's always distractions. Your phone's beeping with emails and messages. You're trying to figure out what's for dinner. You're trying to figure out how you're going to get to work, or who needs to pick up the kids. Sort of dealing with all this stuff in everyday life. And often when all that happens, we go on automatic. So we just do things like turning off the iron or locking the front door automatically and don't really think about it. So then later when we go to try and remember, did I lock the door this morning? It's very hard because we weren't really concentrating or paying attention when we did it. And this might sound a little bit strange, but one way that you can process something a little bit more deeply might even just be to say it out loud. So just to say, I am turning off the iron, or I am locking the door. Your kids might think you're going a bit crazy, but it can really help. Then when you go to remember it, you can remember having said it out loud. And so you've just thought about it that little bit more, which will just help process that information. It can also help. So one thing that we hear quite often, or one thing that can be a very common experience for people with epilepsy, might be having difficulty remembering people's names. So it can be really hard when you meet someone for the first time, or you're introduced to lots of people at an event, trying to hold on to all these different names. So again, in terms of trying to process that information a little bit differently or a little bit more deeply, you might think, for example, if I introduced myself, it can help to say it back. So I'd say, hi, my name's Honor. And you'd be like, oh, nice to meet you, Honor. Or you might ask me, how do you spell that? Do you spell that Honor or Honour? Is it the American spelling or the English spelling? And just doing that and just having a little bit more talk about it can help that information to go in. You might think about whether there are anyone else with the same name, or there are any celebrities with that name. You might think about whether or not you like the name, that sort of thing. So just thinking about it that little in a different way, or that little bit more, can really help. Some people also like to do sort of mnemonics, so associating the word with a different sound or kind of an alliteration. So if someone's called Polly, I guess you could think Pretty Polly. That's a sort of very kind of easy sort of rhyming way to remember that name or to think about that name. So those are some little sort of strategies, and they take time to get used to. So it certainly might not help the first person that you meet if you try this, but these things take time and take a bit of practice and figuring out what works for you and what ways help you to process information best. So other ways of, there's lots of different sort of mnemonic strategies and memory strategies that people like to use. One of them is what people refer to as using sort of pegs or memory pegs. And this can be for example, recalling kind of lists of things that you need, maybe supermarket shopping. And so what you do is you associate a rhyming word with a number. So you might have 1 bun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door. So kind of having a consistent one, so one you use every time, and preferably one that means something to you will be easier to remember. And so you're kind of visualizing these different things and then trying to associate something with that. So, for example, if you need butter and milk from the shops, you might visualize a fresh bun out of the oven with some melting butter on it, or some kind of a delicious sort of lunch with some fresh butter. Or you might associate a delivery of milk sitting by the door and kind of visualize that old school sort of glass jar of milk waiting at the door. So then when you go to the shops and you think, okay, what do I need? 1 bun, butter. I needed butter. 2, 3, 4 door, milk. I needed milk as well. So these strategies, again, can be personal preference. If it doesn't work for you, then that's okay. And they do take time to get used to and to kind of sink in. So in this day and age, it can also be obviously for grocery lists and that sort of thing. There are a million different apps that we can use. So lots of reminders, lots of lists on your phone can also be really helpful just to support that and make that process a little bit easier. What are some other good strategies? Having to use my own memory now and kind of run through them. I'm like, I had a little list written down. Yeah. Other things that are very important, I think, is social support. So, if for some reason, perhaps there's difficulties at the storage phase, and it is genuinely sort of harder to retain that information, then having friends or family, just letting them know, this is, I'm really sorry, it's not, I just have difficulty recalling your name. Would you mind telling me again? Or having a friend or family who comes with you, maybe reminding you before you get there who you're going to see, what your friend's new partner's name is, and that sort of stuff. I think just having that bit of extra support to work around it, because memory difficulties can be part and parcel of living with epilepsy, and that's not sort of anyone's fault or sort of personal difficulties. It's just part of living with this condition. So working around it as best you can is helpful. I think that's probably all I've got on that front. In terms of wrapping up, I guess. I'm going to do a bit of a recap. So I guess to wrap up, we've got the 3 different stages of memory. So encoding or processing the information, storage, tucking that information away, and retrieval, so bringing back the right information at the right time. So most of our strategies and kind of ways of working with memory tend to do with the encoding phase and the retrieval phase. And most of these little strategies or kind of broader scaffolding or ways to support our memory, a lot of that focuses around routine, keeping things regular, having a good structure, as well as processing the information a bit more. So really trying to think of different ways that you can focus on the information and different ways that you can make something meaningful for you, because when something is a bit more personally meaningful, we often remember it better. So a lot of these things that I've been talking about today, there's lots of really good resources. There are some good handouts, and there's actually a really good book on coping with memory difficulties by a neuropsychologist from the UK, Dr. Sally Baxendale. So we'll put a lot of this stuff up on the website so that it's there for everyone to have a browse through themselves, have a think about the different strategies or the different things that might work for them. But otherwise, where can you go to for help, and who can you talk to about some of these memory difficulties? So first of all, it's always good to have a chat with your neurologist about it, have a chat about what you're experiencing, and they might talk to you about, as Terry was talking about, if you have also been experiencing kind of some anxiety or depression symptoms, or if it's been a particularly stressful period, managing that first and seeing how you go. Or you might want to talk to them about medication. So sometimes people's medication can make them feel quite foggy or a bit fatigued, and so fatigue can also affect our attention. But on that front, it's obviously very important to kind of balance out the side effects of your medication with good seizure control, which is sort of the most important thing on that front. If you feel like this is sort of something that you really want to have assessed or looked at closer, then you can talk to your neurologist about a referral to a neuropsychologist. So you might talk to them about coming to see someone like me, and we do a series of different tasks to really get a good picture of your overall thinking. What are your strengths? What might be some of your weaknesses? And then how can you work around them? So it's much more individualized and kind of tailored to you. So those are the sorts of things. You can also talk to, depending on who's in your broader care team, you might talk to an epilepsy nurse or a psychologist or an OT. They can help put together lots of different memory strategies or structures. They have lots of good suggestions for ways to modify your home, different things that you can do at home to support your memory. So utilising the whole team and all their different skills and all their different strengths to really help manage your memory.